Participate, engage, speak out, use your voice to be an effective advocate. The Voices in Advocacy podcast examines the diverse landscape of advocacy, exploring the ins and outs of building influence, driving change, and creating champion advocates. It's now time for the Voices in Advocacy podcast with your host, Roger Rickard.
Hello and welcome to the Voices in Advocacy podcast. I'm Roger Rickard, president and founder of Voices in Advocacy, where we work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, and activate your supporters by turning them into influential advocates. And this is the podcast dedicated to the art of advocacy. This podcast is for the people that work in advocacy efforts for their organizations, be they corporations, associations, trade organizations, and nonprofit cause groups. If you're one of the people that work to build a grassroots advocacy and grow your community of advocates, then you are in the right place. Now, let's get started. Hey, this is part 2 of my U.S. Travel Association interviews. Last week, we interviewed Roger Dow, president and CEO of U.S. Travel Association. In today's episode, we are pleased to be speaking with Tori Barnes, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs and Policy at the U.S. Travel Association, where she leads the government relations, policy development, communications, marketing, and research teams. She previously served as the association's Senior Vice President of Government Relations. Prior to joining U.S. Travel, Tori was an integral part of General Motors Federal Affairs teams for more than 14 years, dealing with many of their most important federal issues. Now, here's a little fun fact about Tori. She is on the board of the Congressional Women's Softball game and coaches, this has got to be a task, coaches the Members of Congress team, which plays the annual game against women in the press to raise money for the Young Survival Coalition. Tori, thank you, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to today's show.
Thanks, Roger. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
The first question should be, how do you have to deal with coaching members of Congress? But I think we'll let that pass unless you're ready to throw a softball at them.
Well, I'm actually excited because we were unable to have the game last year, but we are planning on having an in-person game this year because you can't play softball virtually. So happy to get it coming back.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad that you're raising great money for the cause that you work on that with. So last week, I asked Roger to give our listeners kind of the 50,000-foot view of U.S. Travel's major priorities in the 117th Congress. What is your most pressing priority with Congress?
Well, I think right now we really are pressing on not only Congress, but the administration to restart all segments of travel. So really, obviously, we're starting to see a demand for domestic leisure come back, but it's critical that we open the international borders, that we get meetings and events going again at a greater gathering limitation without the gathering limitations that we're seeing across the states. So overarching messages really are as the rest of the economy opens up, the broader travel economy should as well. And I think it's important that Congress takes that message to the administration. We absolutely are as well. But as it relates specifically to Congress, there are things that they can continue to do. And, obviously the relief package that we saw in December and the previous packages last year were really important, but we know that the travel industry has been the hardest hit industry. And so we'll need to continue to focus on relief even as we get going again, and also recovery. So one important jobs bill is really what we're considering it is the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act, which is a tax package. It's temporary tax incentives for individual tax credits, as well as business meetings credits for both attendee and those that are hosting. It would, if passed, add about 1.5 million more jobs to the economy and almost 600 billion to GDP. So, that bill is really an important piece of recovery legislation that we're hoping can move forward. this summer. And in addition to that, really the infrastructure package. Right now, there's a little bit of a debate on how big the package will be, if it will be bipartisan. But there's a huge opportunity to push travel priorities in this infrastructure bill alongside recovery and relief needs. So those are really what we're focused on right now, with the sort of overarching theme of opening all segments of travel broadly this summer.
You know, during the last administration, we saw Infrastructure Week show up about every other week for about 3 years. There seems to be a different level of importance in this administration. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, one thing to remember, obviously, you've got the administration, Senate, and the House are all controlled by Democrats. So, there are tools that something can move through reconciliation that doesn't necessarily require a 60-vote threshold, which is normally required to get something through the Senate. There is an opportunity. I think, really and truly both sides, though, if they could come to kind of a middle ground, there is an appetite for a bipartisan bill. I think we saw some of the bipartisan work in the Senate move forward last year on infrastructure. It didn't ultimately become law because they didn't get it through, the House, and also to take it to the administration. But quite frankly, there is a great understanding of the need for upgrades to our nation's airports, to roads and bridges and highways. Quite frankly, electrification, charging, as we look at the automakers, with these all electric fleets by 2035. We've got to start laying that groundwork and really get those infrastructure priorities into a real world scenario, or we're going to be lagging behind the rest of the world. So I think that there is a bipartisan effort. I think the question really will be, do Democrats take a partisan tactic in trying to move this through reconciliation and include things beyond infrastructure, and how that maybe muddies the water for future bipartisan work will likely be an issue. So we're hopeful, though, that some travel related priorities will make it forward in this bill.
Well, and it's quite interesting that both travel and infrastructure go so hand in glove with each other. And the fact that you have 435 members of the House and 100 U.S. senators, where each one of their districts are affected by those two key powerful issues, gets their attention. It's not like somebody can say that doesn't affect me in my district. And I think that it's going to be an important time for this country to be able to move forward by having both travel and open it up more, and of course the infrastructure to be able to get us from point A to point B safely and quickly. So last month, U.S. Travel held their legislative day with Congress. You call it Destination Capitol Hill. Now, you've had to do this virtually now, twice, I think. What are the pros and cons of a virtual Hill Day?
Sure. So we actually had a record-breaking virtual fly-in this year. We had 450 plus delegates, 320 members, meetings with members of Congress or senior staff. I think the pro is really that there's a broader reach, that more people can join the meetings, given budgets and the challenges within the industry. The virtual aspect really does help. But I think when it comes down to it, the con is really, the lacking of in-person connections, the real development of relationships. I think nothing really can replace that interaction when you meet face to face, and some of the side conversations that you can have. And I think really, the virtual aspect, again, can be something to tide you over, if you will. But the only way we're really going to genuinely make new relationships, and this goes beyond just our fly-in, but for me, professional meetings and events writ large, and one of the reasons why we really want to see those be able to come back sooner rather than later is because it's that coffee you go and grab with someone, it's the glass of wine you have at the restaurant, or just riding in an elevator with someone and discovering that there's something about the other person that you never knew, and or you initiate, and that helps to spur a future relationship or an ongoing dialogue. It's just really, really, I think, important. And so I think the virtual world can hold us over for some time, but at the end of the day, we've got to get back to meeting in person. And I think especially when it comes to flying in and meeting with your members of Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got two issues now, of course. You've got the issue that surrounded kind of the closing of Capitol Hill because of the pandemic. And then you had the January 6th incident. And from a security standpoint, are you hearing at any point in time when you think that's going to open back up at least a little bit? I'm sure there will be different security concerns than they had prior to this.
Yeah.
Anyway?
Yeah, there are. So I live actually on Capitol Hill and I run up there all the time. They still have the perimeter around the Capitol building, but you can now drive between the House and Senate buildings and the Capitol and walk there as well, which was closed off for about 3 months. And what we're hearing is that they are starting to look at how they can bring back meetings. Likely, I think, to be a little bit more structured. You'll need to have an official appointment. You'll have to check in. Right now, or before, what had happened before, for folks who don't know, anyone could really go into any of the Capitol buildings or the Capitol, congressional buildings or the Capitol, whether or not you had a meeting or not. And I think now it'll be a much more structured process. There are some meetings that are taking place outside of the Capitol and the congressional buildings, mostly, in coffee shops or restaurants around the Capitol. So some of those meetings are ongoing, but I think for the formalized meetings that can accommodate sort of that fly-in, I think that we're probably looking at the fall before we kind of fully understand what those parameters will be. And I think the distribution of the vaccine and what the rate of vaccine, and is there a requirement for either a test or a vaccine to be able to come into the Capitol, I think that may play into it as well. But I know that they're working on those rules right now.
Yeah, they've got a lot on their plate to figure out to make it safe for all parties involved in that. And I'm sure you agree with me. I can't wait till we can get back to that point where we can have the face-to-face engagement with our elected officials in the House of the People. The Hill Day is always about member advocacy, people that support the cause. What is the first thing that comes to mind for you when you think of advocacy?
I think it's really a combination of things. As someone who has always loved those face-to-face meetings with members of Congress and going up to Capitol Hill, I think that that is a really important point of advocacy. And I think also it's that broader reach. It's everything that you can kind of throw at an issue to really lend your voice and the collective voice of an industry to move forward on critical issues affecting the business. And so, that includes, boots on the ground lobbying, that includes grassroots, grass tops. So, that broader voice of the industry, making calls, sending letters, sending emails. It includes those pre-existing relationships, those grass tops where you've got members of Congress being contacted by folks that they know within the industry. It's communication strategies, really, earned media, paid media, digital media, social media, really engaging on all of those on all of those aspects. And then really, there's so much more to consistent touch points and having clear and concise messaging so that there's all of the voices throughout the industry can really lend their voice. We've done, strategic industry sign-on letters that are, more targeted, that maybe a certain delegation to a certain member of Congress or a person in leadership. We've done sign-on letters where you've had 6,000 to 10,000 folks. That's just been more about mass voice. The virtual Hill fly-in. We've got sort of a legislative speaker series that we, hear from members, and that's another point to engage. We have travel talks, which are sort of in the district roundtables, and now we're doing those virtually. So a lot of different options for that collective voice, but really it's all of those things that can build the biggest voice and the greatest advocacy for an issue.
So you mentioned in that great recap of everything that is the touch points of advocacy, you mentioned your legislative speaker series, and I know that you're going to be executing that in a fall advocacy event. Tell us more about that.
Well, no, we're planning, the Legislative Speaker Series is actually a monthly roundtable for members to hear from members of Congress and the Senate. But we are planning on a fall event that will be more of an advocacy-driven event, combination of private sector and government, really to drive home the importance of our industry. And I think, what we really are seeking to do is elevate our voice. I think when you bring private sector and government together, along with the media in a Washington-facing type of event, you can really elevate the voice. And I think that one of the things we're really seeking to do with this as well is demonstrate how significant jobs are to our jobs, travel jobs are to the economy. We've seen now over the last, over a year, what happens when travel really ceases to exist and how many jobs are impacted. I mean, 65% of all pandemic related job losses are in the travel industry. And I think that when you contemplate the hundreds of billions of dollars of loss to the economy and just the crippling effect that not having travel can have on a country, let alone the globe, you really can understand how important it is to bring this industry back. And I think it's now is the time to sort of optimize our voice and be able to focus on a targeted event that can potentially be an annual event that will help to let folks understand how significant it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about grass tops, and we know that the use of grass tops is really important because it's usually who knows who, as well as them being very well versed on the details of the subject matter and the issues at hand. But then you also need to deal with grassroots. And we know the importance that grassroots can bring to help really personalize the story, the real kind of boots on the ground impact that things can have on their ability to be able to conduct business and do their job and even have a job. So how do you, when you want to grow the grassroots, how do you educate and engage and grow those advocates?
So we've done, a ton of webinars this year, really to talk through the policy, not only sort of what is in existing legislation from a relief standpoint, but what we're seeking in additional relief and recovery. So we've used webinars, we've used, one pager, just plain old, education materials. We've also been willing to, have side conversations with delegations of our members. We've done the fly-in. That's obviously been an important tool. But really, it's making things as easy as possible for folks to be able to, talk about the data. Here's the data. Here's the national data. Here's the state-by-state data. Here's the district data. Here are the key talking points. Here are the key messages we want to convey. Here is the impact that passing certain legislation will be able to provide to shorten the recovery time, right? So we've done a lot of engagement, again, in all different forms. And I think that given the breadth of impact that the pandemic has had on our industry, there's really been a huge desire for folks to engage. And so we really utilize that desire to have the opportunity to come be part of this broader voice. And I think we've even seen, folks that on the grassroots side have grown, grass tops relationships to an even stronger point because of the consistent and continued engagement that certain folks have really had with the industry and trying to hone in on how they can be effective to help their business or their destination. So, we really have broadened the tent. And I think also looking, in particular at the breadth of the travel industry from a segmentation perspective. Is everyone's been hurt, whether you're, an attraction or an airline or a hotel or a mom and pop shop, or, you've got your location doing weddings, or you're doing conventions, or you're hosting, you're the flower shop that helps, that provides for weddings, right? Like there's everyone within this industry has been impacted. And so getting all of those voices together, working together on the same messaging has really grown, I think, our advocacy voice, and I think been really, truly something that we can utilize moving forward on all of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I know from research that people that don't participate in advocacy engagement oftentimes comes down to fear. And anything an organization does to help eliminate that fear of engaging with elected officials, because they often think that they know more than the individual advocate knows, where we all know in reality that because you focus on your area and your job, you know much, much more than an individual member of Congress may know about that. And getting them involved and making them feel comfortable in the process is such a huge key, by providing them all the different types of resources that you indicated with that. I know it's difficult because of all the other factors out there, from the physical barriers of not being able to get to the face-to-face engagement with people, but how can organizations move legislation forward in this polarized, kind of divided Congress and country right now?
Well, I really think that it's that continued willingness to engage, right? And I think looking at things, even if there are folks, that you think aren't going to care about what your issue is, or may have a differing view, I think the more that you can educate members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and give anecdotal stories about how your businesses are impacted, or destinations, or what have you. I mean, to the point that you just noted, I think that, we are experts, right, in our own business. And I think the more that we communicate how things are impacting us, the better. And I think that, in this polarized environment, there still are folks that want to work together, that want to get things done. And there are still pieces of legislation that are going to move. So I think that the bigger the voice, the bigger approach to consistency, the importance of being able to have data to back up how a piece of legislation can actually help move the needle for the economy is really, really important. So I think that working together, finding others that you can build into the tent, right? I think the bigger the tent, the louder the voice, and the more inclusive towards finding like-minded issues that we can work on, the more we'll be able to accomplish. I mean, I think over the last several years, what we've seen is maybe a little drip of some pieces of legislation, nothing overly controversial that's moved forward. And then you've seen sort of like these big packages that have happened at the end of the year. Right. I don't know that I think that this year will be much different. Obviously, we've had already one COVID package. We'll likely have either an infrastructure recovery package or something else, and then probably an end of the year bill. But I do think that working on how you can move with leadership on both sides of the aisle, in both the House and the Senate, having a champion that can really take your issue to his or her leadership, and working within a broader coalition can really advance the needle. So I think there is definitely a way to get things done, but you have to have a comprehensive strategy. I mean, this goes through where you have to have kind of all of those different pieces of advocacy to help to bolster your message, to help bolster the issue. It can be done. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of consistent engagement.
That's right. It takes an awful lot of work. Tori, any final thoughts that you'd like to throw out, or how can people reach U.S. Travel for more information?
Yeah, no, absolutely. U.S. Travel is really the umbrella organization for the whole travel and tourism industry, all different sectors, and we really are focused on bringing back international travel, opening up professional meetings and events across the country, and obviously helping to boost the domestic leisure that we expect will come back, as we head into the summer. We're at ustravel.org. Always feel free to reach out to me as well at vbarnes@ustravel.org. And we are, going to continue to work really, really hard to help the travel economy recover in a shorter time horizon than the current 2025 expectation for when we will recover back to 2019 levels. We are jobs, we're commerce, we are trade. We are really critical to the whole of the industry, and with the powerful voice of all of us working together, I think that we can really move the needle and help the overall country get back on track. And so we'll be focused and would love anyone that wants to engage us alongside of us.
What a great way to wrap up today's conversation with Tori Barnes, Executive Vice President, Public Affairs and Policy for the U.S. Travel Association. Thank you so much for being on today's show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I hope to see you in person soon.
Boy, wouldn't that be lovely for all of our sakes?
Absolutely.
Be well, Tori.
You too. Thank you.
Now it's time for the Advocacy Engagement Tip. Organizations and their staff are scrambling to adapt to the change all around us. You may be no different, as you may have less bandwidth in both people and time to achieve your desired outcomes. However, we should remind ourselves of proactive activities you can do now to affect your advocacy success in the future. Do you have a program to train and onboard any new advocates or reinforce advocacy best practices to your existing grassroots advocates? Do you have this as an online advocacy training program? There is a lot of value in online training for your advocates. Online eliminates the expense of travel required for face-to-face training. You can also track the advocate's progress as they move along, and you can reward their completion. We are proud to have Rap Index as a sponsor of the show. Let's face it, today's advocacy arena is just plain noisy. Organizations are stretched. You need every advantage to make sure your issue gets the attention it deserves and your voice heard. The Rap Index is the best way to do just that, by finding your stakeholders' relationships and engagement power. Get past the noise. Know who your people know. Go to rapindex.com, that's RAP index.com, and tell them Roger sent you for a special offer. In upcoming episodes, you will be treated to great interviews from the leaders of the world of politics, associations, and nonprofit causes. Next week, we have as our guest former U.S. Senator from the great state of Alaska, Mr. Mark Begich. I am sure you will enjoy this interview. If you like today's podcast, head over to where you find your podcasts and subscribe to the Voices in Advocacy podcast today. Again, a big thank you to Tori Barnes for being on today's show. I greatly appreciate her time today, and without question, her unwavering passion for advocacy. Well, that's it for this episode of the Voices in Advocacy. And remember, you have the power to be an effective, influential advocate. Now, go out and make it a better world.
We hope you enjoyed today's Voices in Advocacy podcast and look forward to you joining us again next week. To learn more about Voices in Advocacy, go to our website, voicesinadvocacy.com.